Hey, my name is Steve, composer, engineer and lecturer, and welcome back to the channel. This is your first steps into the KONTAKT sampler. In the last video, we kicked off chapter 2 in this series, becoming acquainted with the KONTAKT sampler and its interface, and even creating our first instrument. We have one group of samples in there, but now it's time to take it further. In this video, we're going to take a look at adding some more groups and even some velocity layers. Let's dive in. Okay, so it's time to add some more groups. This is sort of the norm for KONTAKT sample libraries because you don't often want just one group of samples. For your first instrument, you may well just do that. That may just be enough for now. But if you want to combine two textures together and have control over things like panning, volume, or tuning, separating them into different groups gives you that flexibility later, particularly when we launch into chapter 3 with scripting. It's going to be a huge help there, having all the samples in separate groups. So let's dive in. We've definitely got some more groups to use. So where we left off is we had this one group here that was made of our plucks. So I haven't renamed it yet. Let's rename it now. I'll double click and I'll just call this one plucks. That way I keep track of it mentally. I know that the plucks are going to be in that one. All right, let's create a new empty group and we're going to drag some more samples in. So I've created the empty group there. Wonderful. And let's rename that one bells. Now at this point there is something very important to let you know, because otherwise it can really cause some headaches later on. You'll see this red button that's edit all groups, and currently it's bright red, it's turned on, and I want to turn that one off. The reason this is so important is if that one is on and you then go and make a tuning change, volume change, something happens with the main effects or a modulator or something, that's going to affect every group you have. If you've created a whole bunch of groups, that's not good because you're going to be affecting everything all at once. And if you delete something on one but didn't want to delete it on the other, well, we've got some problems for sure. Now it definitely has some uses and I'll definitely be showing you why that button exists and why it's there. But for now, turn that one off and get in the habit of making sure that one is off and only on when you need it on. Okay, so I've selected the bells here, but we can still see the zones here. But those zones, if I highlight them, they're actually part of this group, plucks. They're not part of bells. So what I can do is I can put on something called selected groups only, this button down here. And if I select that one, they all disappear because I've selected the bells group, not the plucks group. If I click on the plucks group, there they all are there. But when I come back over to bells, I can't see them. This is something that visually just helps, particularly when you're loading in more samples. I don't want the other zones to get in the way, basically, of what I'm doing. Right, let's drag in bells. Now, if we open up here and we look at our bells, we actually have two layers. So we've got a loud layer, which are these 4 samples here, and then a soft layer, these 4 samples here. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to drag in the soft ones. So I'm going to click and hold those, bring them all in, and drag them in place. Doesn't really matter what key they're selected on at the moment because it's just put the root note on whatever key I've dropped that zone onto. So not incredibly useful. We remember from last video, we jump into edit, auto map setup. We make sure that that final A#3 or whatever the name of the note is going to be made the root key. So apply that there. I usually like to mash it a couple of times just in case it's accidentally not done something. And now we can see as we select, we've got different named keys, the root notes appearing in lots of different places there. So then we can select and highlight them all, jump into edit and auto map functions, auto spread keys via root note. Wonderful. And to get rid of this, deselect, because I can't click anywhere in the background because it's all consumed by zone. If I jump into edit, deselect all zones, and then I can use my arrows or this section up here to reduce the range. And I'm just going to set that one to C5 there. And this one down here, we don't need all those low notes. We can jump it up to C2. So now we have a sample here that's stretching all the way down to C2 and all the way up to A#2. This one here sitting in the middle. And you can see how the root note is sort of in the middle of most of these. Now there are some theories about where you should stretch and how far you should stretch one way or the other. Some people say definitely stretch down more than stretching up. Some say stretch on either side as long as it's moving the least. I think there's a call for both. Sometimes when you're stretching the sound, what you're doing is you're stretching the waveform out. You've captured something in a particular detail and then stretching it out. That can be really handy, because that means that instead of having really detailed, muddy sort of stuff in the low end, because it's stretching out, all of that information is getting stretched out. So you've got more space, more clarity. If you compress on the other hand and stretch it up, that means that the audio's got more dense, more information in one small space, and that can sometimes sound not so great. However, samples don't often like being stretched very far before they start to get artifacts and weird sounds. If you've ever taken a line and tuned it up by an octave or two, you'll know what I mean. The reason vocalists sound like a chipmunk when they're tuned up is because they sound unrealistic. They no longer sound human. Same if you tune them down, they sound like a robot because they don't sound realistic anymore. So we have to be careful of that with sampling as well. So KONTAKT prefers just to spread it a minimal amount, not too far either side, so it gets the root note to sort of be in the middle of that range. And I'm going to leave it like that for now, but both options are there, and why not explore both? Now, if I play this, something unusual is going to happen. I'm starting to hear the bells, but I'm still hearing the plucks. Even though I can't see the zones in there, I'm still hearing them. And that's because they still exist. If I turn off the selected groups only, you can see the overlapping zones. They're both there. There's a whole range of them. So if I've turned on select groups only, but I only want to hear those, then I need to turn on group solo. If I turn on group solo and then play some notes, now I can hear just those notes, which is really nice. Now, this is just one set or one layer. There is a second velocity layer. And to be honest, I'm glad for that because these aren't very loud, they're not very detailed and not very good. They're meant to be the very soft hits. So I want these to be played only when I hit the keys softly. And I want another different set of samples to be played when I play them loudly. Let's take a look at how to do that. If I highlight all these and turn our attention to the vertical aspect of this sort of graph that's going on, this is velocity, whereas along the horizontal axis or the x-axis, it's pitch, obviously, depending on the lower keys and the higher keys that are going to be played back. Up here, it's velocity from the lowest, softest possible note to the highest and loudest possible note. I've got the same sort of arrow keys. If I drag these down, I can reduce the velocity. You can actually see the velocity changing here, and I can do the same thing, drag it down or double click and set in a particular velocity. I'm going to put in 40. And there we have it. We got 1 to 40 range on all of these. For 41 to 127, the full range of velocity, the leftover bit, I'm going to want some different samples. So I'm going to go back to my samples, grab these loud ones and drag those in. Follow the same process. Let's jump in here, do our auto map setup, make root key lovely. You can double check that. Yep, you can see it's definitely made the root key there. Let's highlight all of these, edit, and go auto map spread by root range. Now, this has done something a little bit unusual. The reason it hasn't spread out like it did before is because there are overlapping zones. Right now, these two zones here are overlapping, these two here, and so on. We need to resolve that first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in here, type in 41 for my velocity. So now they're no longer overlapping. And then I'm going to try my spread out range again. There we go. Now we're getting a more familiar sort of thing. Let's do the same sort of trimming as before. Let's get these back to where we want them to be. And let's play the instrument. Lovely, we have a sound and we've got these bell sounds. And what's great here is if I hit a note softly, it'll choose the softer samples. Let's take a look at that. You can actually see a red line appearing here as an indication of what velocity it's hitting. But if I hit a bit louder, then it's going to go into the higher region or the second layer. It's a subtle tonal difference that brings depth and clarity, and that's why it's wonderful when you can capture something that has this benefit of velocity layers. Now you can hear some changes, and if you want to, you can blur these changes. If I play this F to G, for example, it's a big change in the way that the note sounds. If you want to though, you can change this. What I can do is overlap these regions a little bit. That way you'll actually have two notes being played at once. But I can create a little bit of a fade. If I hold down my command key, I can create a little bit of a fade in here, and over here a little bit of a fade in like that. And now I've got two notes playing, but they're slowly fading in and out of each other. I can also do this for velocity as well. If I want there to be a bit of a blend between these regions, I can definitely do the same. Let's bring this down and then blend it up. Now you can hear a more gentle fade in and out. That could be really, really wonderful. So with all these fade in and fade out options, you've got a lot of flexibility to make your sound as good as it can be and avoid those sort of little jumps or little unexpected glitches. Okay, so now let's jump in and we'll take group solo off. I'm going to turn off select group only, and we can see all of our zones that are in here. Now each group has the benefit of its own tuning, its own volume, its own pan, and all those sorts of things. So let's hear what it sounds like with the plucks and bells together. So I can hear the plucks quite strongly. That's definitely being heard here. If I wanted to, I could click on the plucks and maybe bring the volume of that one down a little bit more. Now I've got a different balance, a different change. Maybe I want to bring the bells up a little bit more, hear more of that crisp bell sound. Select bells, let's jump in here and bring these up a little bit more. Now we've got a very different sound, and we're going to have some control over that in chapter 3 when we're actually scripting our own GUI. We definitely want that to be one of the capabilities. But have a look through the groups, because you can see there are a lot of different controls and different things that could be changed per group. You've got your own effects, which we're going to get into in a later video. You've got your own tuning, you've got different tracking methods, you've got lots of different things that can be set up per group. And that is why we have separate groups the way that we do. Okay, so we've added some more groups and we've worked out how velocity layers are going to work in our instrument. It's starting to shape up into a full instrument, and now we can play all the groups together. If you remember back to chapter 1, the last episode, episode 4, we took a look at test driving the samples in Logic Sampler. Right now, we are pretty much as far into KONTAKT as we were in that Logic Sampler. Now we can play them, we can balance the volume a little bit and get a sense of what they all sound like together. This time, of course, though, in the KONTAKT sampler. So if you were unsure about that one, now you can actually do it in the KONTAKT sampler. So next time, if you want to test drive your samples, why not do it in KONTAKT? Now though, we want to take it further. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at modulators and how they can shape your sound a little bit further. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on that one, and ding that bell so you get notified when it lands. But otherwise, I'll catch you in the next one.